The Kurdish population totals around 30 to 40 million people worldwide. They are of Indo-European descent and are one of the indigenous peoples of the Mesopotamian plains and highlands. The majority of Kurds live in Turkey, followed by Iran, Iraq, Syria and Germany. They share cultural ties and language dialects, and the majority are Sunni Muslim, but some also adhere to other faiths. In the early 20th century, many Kurds started making calls for the creation of a homeland, which is often dubbed Kurdistan. After World War I, Western states had originally promised the Kurds their own country, but it never materialized.
When the Ottoman Empire dissolves at the end of World War I, you have a number of different agreements that the colonial powers come to. You have the Sykes-Picot Agreement, you have the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, which Turkey particularly took a lot of issue with, basically because it was a lot of the Allies kind of carving up Turkey into a number of parts, giving territory to Italians and Greeks and British and so forth.
That treaty did include the possibility of the Kurdish people having their own state, but Mustafa Kemal Atatürk played a pivotal role in changing that. He was a colonel in the Ottoman army of the time and was able to consolidate the remainder of the Ottoman military to expel the Allied powers, founding Turkey.
It was kind of the agreement, and this is a really loose way of interpreting it, but France would have Syria and the Brits would have Iraq and so forth. So basically you have the drawing of boundaries that not only kind of divide populations based on ethnic and religious divisions, but also are manipulated in order to kind of serve the colonial powers' interests.
That meant the Kurds were split across Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria.
Ataturk and his cadre had gone through the Balkan Wars and had gone through World War I and saw ethnic nationalism as dangerous. There was an erasure of Kurdish ethnic identity, and by erasure I mean killings, displacements, changing of town names, moving Kurds across the country.
In the 1970s, a group of students led by Abdullah Öcalan came together to set up a Marxist-Leninist region across southeast Turkey. They named their group the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, and their aim was to create a greater Kurdish state spreading across neighboring countries. At the time, Turkey was dealing with its own problems of the Cold War. There was escalating violence between left and right-wing groups that eventually led to a military coup in 1980. A year before, Öcalan left for Syria, then later to Lebanon. Here he established the PKK's first headquarters in the Bekaa Valley with the support of the Syrian government. In 1984, the PKK began its armed guerrilla campaign against Turkey. It started attacking state officials and civilians across the country. Villages were burned down, children were kidnapped, there were suicide bombings, and people were murdered. In the 1990s, the PKK attacks went beyond the borders of Turkey. There were highly coordinated attacks and illegal demonstrations across Europe, many of which ended in violent clashes with police. During the same period, the US State Department published numerous reports about the PKK involvement in organized crime and drug trafficking. These events later led the US government to officially list the PKK as a terrorist organization. Giving into the ongoing pressure of Turkey, Syria also stopped openly harboring the PKK. This pushed them to move their headquarters to the Kandil Mountains in northern Iraq, just across the border from Turkey, where it remains today. In 1999, the PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan was arrested in Kenya, but his arrest didn't deter his followers. Laying low for the next 6 years, the PKK cadre consolidated its power and reorganized. In 2003, the US invasion of Iraq led to the rise of the Iraqi Kurds. This prompted the PKK to re-strategize and declare that it was shifting its focus from fighting an asymmetric war against Turkey to establish breakaway cantons in 4 countries. The PKK cadres are present in different countries under different names, like the PJAK in Iran, the PCDK in Iraq, and the PYD in Syria. The PYD's armed wing is the YPG. This is the root of the problem Turkey faces at its southern border, and much of it is thanks to the US policy regarding the YPG in northern Syria. Washington supported an armed group, the YPG, while it calls its parent organization, the PKK, a terrorist group. This is despite White House officials acknowledging on many occasions that there are different sides of the same coin.
Reports indicate that they are aligned or at least have substantial ties to the PKK. Is that true?
Yes, we have.
YPG and PKK are connected both ideologically and organizationally. Ideologically, both groups are loyal to Abdullah Öcalan, the founder and leader of the PKK, something the YPG officials admit. But the link between the organizations is not limited to ideology. The two groups are also closely knit in organization structure. YPG fighters who came to Syria in 2012 received their training in PKK camps in Kandil Mountain. YPG and other PKK offshoots are run by the KCK, whose executive committee is limited to senior staff trained by the PKK in Kandil, and some of them currently live in Brussels. Fighters in Kandil choose and communicate with YPG as to who leads the group. Fast forward to 2013, Turkey started a peace process and announced that there were ongoing talks with the jailed PKK leader Öcalan. As a result, a bilateral ceasefire was agreed on, and it looked as though the violence that had claimed the lives of over 40,000 people was coming to an end. During this time, Turkey saw a dramatic decrease in terrorist-related attacks and deaths, but violence flared once again in 2015, when the ceasefire was unilaterally broken by the PKK, and the organization's senior figure, Besse Hozat, announced that the time had come for a revolutionary public war. Meanwhile, the fight against Daesh in Syria was escalating, and the US had shifted its allegiance to the YPG. They told the group to rebrand themselves as the Syrian Democratic Forces.
They formerly called themselves the YPG, who the Turks would say equated to the PKK. You're dealing with a terrorist enemy of mine. How can you do that, ally? So we literally played back to them, hey, you got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Then they began training and equipping them. The US-backed SDF did clear Daesh out of northern Syria and its capital Raqqa, but then took control. When Raqqa was cleared of Daesh in 2017, these pictures emerged. On the posters was Abdullah Öcalan, the incarcerated founder of the PKK. Since the defeat of the Daesh in northern Syria, the US abandoned the rebranded YPG organization, leaving the problem for Turkey to deal with. Since then, Turkey has launched several operations into northern Syria, the latest being Operation Claw Sword, targeting PKK bases after a recent terrorist attack in Istanbul on the 13th of November. Yakut Tobias for CI Radio News.